Welcome to this webinar entitled Branching Out, Climate Solutions in Complex Urban Environments. To begin, I'd like to recognize our ancestors who brought us all together today to branch out, to explore the role of environmental design in urban forestry and the cities where most of us live. I'm speaking with you from occupied ancestral homes of Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples in Detroit, Southeast Michigan, USA. I'd like to thank and recognize Josh Klipp of San Francisco, who envisioned and engineered this series of talks on urban forestry in fall 2020. My name is Kasey Rios, and I work on environmental literacy and advocacy in San Francisco and Detroit with an organization that I founded with friends a dozen years ago in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, the Demonstration Gardens. Our theme for 2019-2020 has been cool island learning, and promoting healthy urban tree canopy has been a primary focus. Forests and cities are natural partners in human health and productivity, yet until recently, they have been seen as antithetical in urban planning practice. Concentrating population density in cities conserves resources needed for human mobility and health and preserves more of the earth as wilderness, which is a reservoir for biodiversity, clean air, and water. Since you're here today, you probably understand that climate change is real and that if we don't act quickly, it may be too late. In our urban areas, the impacts are increasingly dire, especially as it relates to trees. Trees are one of our greatest allies in the fight for sustainable cities. They provide shade, filter pollutants out of the air, support biodiversity, slow down freshwater processes, capture and sequester carbon dioxide. All things we desperately need to be doing more of. But growing and protecting canopy in urban areas is often complicated by competing infrastructure such as power lines and pipes. Existent trees are often not protected or prioritized in city improvement projects. Trees along public rights-of-way are often unprotected and under-maintained. Development has penciled out human needs for access to nature, and ecosystem services of mature functioning forests are routinely undervalued in the equation of building and profit from building equals progress. Cities in general are now facing massive budget issues in the new era of COVID, so all systems are under duress. For decades, cities have not prioritized their urban canopies, and now we are forced to look at innovative solutions to turn this around. So how are barriers to urban, how are barriers to urban thrival of humans and trees being mitigated through environmental design? How can you be a part of this movement toward greater resilience through encouraging urban forests? In design language, we talk about biomimesis, design that mimics natural processes. Since we are primates with large imaginations, this is particularly powerful. And from the individual to global scale, trees and forests teach through example. As a gardener, you may know that for many plants at the site of trauma, hormones rush to generate root hairs, then roots. From our work in downtown gardens in San Francisco, we see that traumatized individuals seek experiences in nature, and the more traumatized, the more they respond to access. When stewardship is activated, the neural network may be engaged toward resilience. Pivotal indicators of health improve: reduced anxiety and depression, greater ability to connect socially, increased optimism and self-advocacy. We could call this branching out. Where this touches the global scale, we are understanding that forests are connected widely and deeply below ground in a dense mycelium net, a vast neural network where resources and information are exchanged. The largest part of forests that exists outside the zone of human perception is one of the greatest sources of resilience in the biosphere. We can't sense it directly, but it can inform our imagination. Too long excluded from urban design, except as a tool to raise property values, awareness is awakening in cities worldwide toward integration of forests in their infrastructure. We could call this rooting in. Today, we are going to hear from 3 practitioners, designers who are coming at urban green infrastructure in different dimensions, who made themselves professionals in the urban forest industry, as it were. They aren't arborists. They're engineers, opera singers, and lawyers. But they have applied their unique perspectives to tough urban canopy challenges. They have come up with some incredibly innovative solutions. We will see presentations from them, and then we will have some time to discuss and answer questions. With that, we're going to kick this off with our first panelist, Sara Cinnamon. Welcome, Sara. Sara is a director at McKinsey Design in San Francisco. Her areas of expertise include medical devices, inclusive design, efficient design for manufacture and assembly, and systems thinking. Sara earned her bachelor's degree in engineering from UC Berkeley and her master's in mechanical engineering from MIT. Take it away, Sara.
Awesome. Thank you, Kasey, and thank you, Josh, for having me. Just a little bit of visual description. I am a white woman with a short haircut, short brown hair, currently a quarantine haircut, clear glasses, and I'm sitting in a brown chair in front of a concrete wall. A little bit of context of how I got here to this issue is, as Kasey mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Most of my work is in medical devices, so I'm used to figuring out very complex problems. And I started to learn about how the San Francisco is one of the least treed cities in the world, lowest canopy percentage, and started hearing about different projects that were going on. Like, oh, we want to replant trees along Market Street. For instance, the ones who are there right now are nearing their end of life. They're going to be going through a beautification project, and but the problem that was being considered is that there's a lot of infrastructure underground, for Muni, for BART, for electricity, for water, that is super important to the city's functioning, that would limit the size of trees that could be grown there safely. Through other projects, I also learned that the Department of Recreation and Parks was not having enough trees to be able to replant trees in their spaces, and we didn't have a nursery in the city. It was too expensive to get trees to that space. So I actually put together a little presentation, because this is kind of what I do in my day job. Is I listen and I learn and I try to put things together in a puzzle. So what I'm showing in my presentation right now is an executive summary that kind of highlights what I just talked about. That San Francisco's wanting to replant along Market Street, but they didn't have a way to help the trees be big enough to the end of their life due to the infrastructure underground. So their original plan was just let them plant them, let them grow, but then cut them down when they got too big. So the solution that we kind of came up with was to, okay, plant trees on Market Street, let them grow to however big they can get in the available soil volume, but then transfer them to the parks, and using Market Street as the nursery for San Francisco parks, where they can be large, mature, beautiful trees. Some of the problems that come across with this, is the challenges, is that how do you get a tree out of these basins and into the park? How can you do this in a low-cost way? Because as we know, city budgets are always constrained. And then how can we do this in a sustainable way that involves the community wherever possible? So as an engineer, I started out with listing requirements. The presentation that's being shown right now is a list of requirements, such as new trees are going to be planted along the Market Street corridor. The concerns that goes with that is that limited volume below grade limits the size of the trees that they can get to in these locations. If we're going to be using these transporting planters, the planters must be robust. So the planters need to survive more than 10 years, subject to weather, wear and tear, and vandalism. We need to be able to understand how these trees are planted and taken out and transported with minimal impact to existing infrastructure and traffic patterns. If you have a tree moving through the forest or moving through the Market Street down to a park, probably shouldn't be doing that at 9 a.m., for instance. Some of the other features for the health of the tree is understanding what the soil volume is and how big can a tree get in a given volume of soil. And so there's actually a table on the bottom of this slide that shows the amount of water needed and the amount of soil available, that what a tree can get to in that sense. And so knowing the size of the planter basins in along Market Street, we can see that we can probably get a tree growing up to 6 inches of DBH, which is how big the trunk is at average chest height. Also need to understand how we can encourage healthy growth patterns of the root ball, transport without damaging the root ball. So there's a lot of concerns that need to be addressed in any kind of solution that's coming through. So one of the concepts that created was a cyclical nature. So there's what's shown on the screen right now is a series of 8 boxes that work in a cycle. The first one is to assemble a container. What that container looks like has not been determined yet. Then you're going to plant a tree into that container. Third, you're going to put that prepared container with a tree into the basin, for instance, on Market Street. Let that tree grow, water it, prune it as needed, help it maintain. When it comes time for it to be transferred to its permanent location, you have to prepare that location in the park. Make sure that it's big enough. Then the 6th step would be to transport it to the park. I learned that the city does have flatbed trucks and small crane trucks to be able to use this. One of the questions that kind of remains is there clearance with the overhead wires, for instance, from Muni Electricity, that could they actually get there? Once a tree is in the park, disassemble the container, and then the tree grows. That's where the final state is. And so now you've got this disassembled container, you can reuse it and start the cycle over again. So when we're trying to think about this is a great idea and high level concept, but then what's the next step? What do these containers look like? How are they made? How is it actually transported? And so this is where we can go into the next level of detail and talk about the different constraints and pros and cons. So what's shown on page now is one concept that's almost like a cheesecake tin, where it's a hoop of material with a solid base that can grab around the tree and then can be lifted out with 2 crossbars across the top when it's time. And so this is a way you can kind of unbuckle it, get it off the tree once it's transported into the park, and can help enable that for reuse. This is another picture showing a cheesecake tin as an example. And one of the other things to concern about is in a constrained volume like that, how to encourage healthy root growth. And so there's pictures on the right side that show a corrugated tin pattern for a planter that can help the roots grow down and around as they're supposed to. Then we've got a second concept that looks more kind of like the lifting part for a dump truck. And so it's almost like you can squeeze it together to let the tree in and out, and using gravity as your friend, when you're lifting it, it wants to stay closed. So you're trapping the tree in there. And then the page that I'm showing now is a mock-up that I made in Legos of how that would work to demonstrate the physics of it, and showing how when you've got upward force on part of it, it stays closed, and then you can push down on the levers on top. It'll open up and release the tree out the bottom. And then if you remove a hinge pin, then you'll be able to separate the 2 halves and reuse the process again. A third one is more of a square or an oblong that has pins at each corner that kind of hold these hinges together. So you can have it as a contained unit, be able to lift and drop, and then just take these pins out when it's time, and then take the side panels and the bottom off. So the next picture shows kind of an example of these metal tins, like how do you make this in heavy steel pieces, and how do you put the pin through? How do you protect the pins underneath, for instance, a permeable surface, so that they can't be tampered with before it's time? So this is a very quick overview of a bunch of different kind of technical concepts, but the main point of this is that you can get creative with the solutions that we're considering. You understand kind of like the definition of the problem that you're trying to solve, of like temporary yet robust planters that can be reused over and over again. How can you put them together quickly, take them apart easily, reuse them safely while protecting the tree and enabling its growth? There are probably more options. So if anybody on the chat or on the webinar has any ideas for other ways to make this, please do share. We're all totally open. Again, all of these concepts were designed with cost in mind. Simple processes, simple parts, and readily available materials. Being able to understand where can we get this materials? Can we use any reclaimed material from local construction? Can we use uh, different long-lasting weather-made materials that are available, such as Corten, which is that nice steel that gets the orange patina on it, galvanized steel sheet, so it'll be very corrosion resistant as well, aluminum sheet or corrugated tin. And the next part that we really wanted to include is including the community. So how can we partner with the trade schools in the area? How can we partner with fabrication schools like the Crucible in Oakland? Or using local fabricators that are pretty well known in the area for doing really good work and in exactly this type of area. So how can we kind of localize it and to be able to make this embodied pretty well? And so this is kind of the conversation. Again, if you know anyone who's into fabrication or knows about this, please do reach out to us as well. Next, we get to kind of the installation and transportation. So like I mentioned, the city does have access to these crane trucks, small winch trucks. So we've established the structure of the problem. We need to be able to transport trees safely. We looked at some different concepts for what those planters could look like and how we might be able to move them. And so the next step is, how do we actually move them? How do we pick them up safely? How do we get them onto a truck and off of a truck? How do we get them into the new planting location? And so this is where we can consider things like, oh, is there temporary wheels that go with each planter? Are there little doodads that you can stick on the corner of the planting basin on Long Market Street, for instance, that can help you lift it out? It's a complicated problem and it's a fun problem. And just this, what this really shows is how you can kind of combine a bunch of different skills together and needs together, again, by listening and matching and being able to just kind of like taking it one step at a time from high level to, okay, we got a concept we can explore, and then we can get into the end of life, like the full life cycle of this concept and how, what can we do there. Now, the other thing that we want to consider is the health of the tree while they're planted along market. How can we help them thrive and grow most quickly? And so what's shown on the page right now is some different ideas for irrigation. How can we get water from the street into the roots very easily? Or, you know, if there's a funnel at the corner that gets it to the bottom, is there a reservoir of, you know, gravel at the bottom that has some wicks coming up? So how can we encourage healthy root growth? Um, the other things, you know, once they're in situ, is what we can consider is how to make this beautiful and enjoyable to be around. How can we create these trees as a place of social interaction and celebration so that people can really interact and be with these trees while they're here? Different considerations also around irrigation, getting porous pavement, for example, so that the water can come through. And so some of the images that are shown on the slide right now include like very sculptural benches that surround the trees. People sitting and having coffee underneath the trees, underneath the shade while they're here. Being able to just enjoy them while they're in the city environment. So when we've gotten to this point so far, we've got a lot of questions still to answer. But there's understanding, what do we do next from this? This is a great idea. Now what? So again, some of the questions that I mentioned before were like, you know, is there free passage from Market Street to possible planting locations without interference from overhead structure? You know, understanding what is the budget and the timeline for the city. Could this program be extended to other areas of downtown that have a similar basin size limitation? You know, this started from understanding the constraints of Market Street, but there are a lot of other places within San Francisco that have similar competing infrastructure concerns underneath their sidewalks. And then a question for the city and for the arborists that I wanted to bring this to is, what other concerns or requirements have I missed? What has not yet been addressed? So what we kind of see as next steps here is to kind of discuss these details with the arborists, you know, as the tree protectors, with city infrastructure officials to know what's possible. What kind of irrigation infrastructure might already exist? We've got water lines running through for the city. Could we tap into that to water the trees as well? Talking with other construction engineers and designers to collaboratively iterate and refine these concepts. Again, these are just meant to be kind of a conversation starter to think through the problem and think more creatively. You know, I'm not an expert in city planning. I'm not an expert in what trees need, but I can ask the right questions. And that's kind of what I feel like my role is as an engineer. And so what I want to say also is that I think everybody is an engineer. We're figuring out problems in our daily lives every day. And it's about asking questions, about listening to the data, and about kind of combining things in unique ways. Um, and so, what I would want to kind of posit to the people who are listening here is, what do you see as problems in your environment? What do you hear about? What do you hear about from different folks on different sides of the same issue? And then how can we all work together to ask the right questions, frame the problem, and create new options within that bounds? Um, Again, for the city, it would be researching and identifying the right materials and manufacturers, trying to be as local as possible. And then as concepts are developed, how can we turn this into something we could share with other cities? And again, going back to how budgets are so constrained in the city, could they file for patents and be able to license this design to other urban areas as a means to generate more income? So thinking holistically about this, from the whole life cycle of the tree to what the city needs, and understanding from like cradle to cradle, what is going on, what's needed from the user centric side, the tree centric side, the city centric side, and then the business centric side. Like, how can we make this a sustainable solution for all? And that is my brief overview. Hopefully, not too brief. But yeah, any questions? More than welcome. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Sara. That is that's brilliant work. It's very inspiring, and I especially love the built-in sort of emphasis on trial and iterating.
Yep.
And incorporating, it makes room for incorporating lots of different perspectives and learning from what we're doing. And I think that that's often a critical missing piece in urban design processes. It's a lot like, again, it's a lot like how nature works. So I love the way you're bringing out your engineering into to solve a very in a human nature interface context. It's brilliant. And also I like the way that you are treating one of our fundamental problems, which is that we treat trees kind of as furniture, like we're just gonna when we don't need that design of tree anymore, we just cut it down and replace it with another one. But it doesn't really work as either an ecosystem service provider or in a spiritual way. People need to feel connected to their places. So thank you so much for bringing this forward. And let's come back to you again in a little bit with more questions. I would like to introduce everyone to Kindra. Kindra Scharich is an accomplished opera singer who wandered into the world of urban canopy when she became involved in the city of San Francisco's proposal to remove dozens of trees along 24th Street in San Francisco, where she currently calls home. Ultimately, Kindra became the community project manager for the newly created Mission Verde, an innovative partnership between the San Francisco Department of Public Works and Calle 24 to plant and water 3 times the amount of replacement trees originally proposed by the city. So we thank you for bringing your ideas forward here today. Kindra, could you tell us about them?
Thank you so much, Kasey, and thank you, Josh, and brava, Sara, for that presentation, which was so remarkable and extraordinary. Thank you for that. So maybe I should just start by sharing my screen with everybody. Just a second. Okay, I really love this Venn diagram. Take important things and then things that you can control and focus your efforts on the place where these two things intersect. And I think that when we're looking at big world problems, at least I feel this way as an ordinary person, it can be very overwhelming to think about all the things that need attention in the world. And if there's one thing that I've learned through this tree process, to which I'm very much a rookie, and it's a new world for me. It's to do what this diagram admonishes. And it's an important learning to keep in mind in anything that we're attempting to do. So I first became involved in the 24th Street ficus tree fight more than a year and a half ago, when I noticed that 2 trees had been cut down on my block. I was upset about it. I talked to the contractors. They assured me that those were the only trees that were planned on being cut down. And then I came back from a trip to this posting that was on the tree directly in front of my studio, which I can actually show you all right here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's this beautiful ficus tree that has been such a source of comfort and joy, and for all this last decade. So I was upset about this. I didn't know what to do, and that it was really that that pang that I felt that inspired me to attend the hearing that you see the picture of, and then many more hearings, and ultimately become an appellant in this case, one of 4 appellants in the removal of 78 ficus trees on 24th Street in San Francisco. And I just included some pictures of our process, because when I go backwards and look at what the journey between that day of seeing that notice on this tree until now, there were so many little steps, none of which I could have anticipated. I never thought I would become an appellant in a case. I had no idea what it meant. I didn't really know the ramifications of all of it. So, and as Sara was saying, I mean, I'm not a tree expert. You know, I'm just a regular person who cares about the San Francisco tree canopy, and in particular cared about, selfishly, the tree in front of my apartment. So it didn't start as an altruistic thing. It started as a really kind of selfish thing, and grew to more of an altruistic thing. This is a list of all of the many community meetings that we ended up, creating as a community to try to solve this problem of how to save the 24th Street trees. Really, this is kind of a picture, I would say, diary of some of the work that we did on 24th Street in analyzing the urban canopy, and really collecting data about what would be lost if 78 of our trees were actually cut down. Interestingly, there wasn't really solid data about the carbon sequestration that was happening from these trees. So we had to measure the trees to figure out, if we cut these trees down, what is our community actually losing? It's not just 78 trees, it's a quantifiable environmental impact. And so I was part of a larger group of community members that wanted that data so that we could sort of measure really what the loss is. We raised money in order to do this study. We raised money in order to have an independent arborist report that could report to us sort of what trees, the health of the overall trees, because at the time of receiving notice of this huge, mass removal, the only data that we had was from the city about the health of the trees, and the city was saying these 78 trees need to go, but we didn't have a secondary study to compare that to. So as a community, we started a GoFundMe campaign and raised the funds to hire an independent arborist to have a sort of second source of information about the health of the trees. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because I realize I just launched into a bunch of information. That's a kind of background. So I learned about the removal of the trees, became an appellant, was one of the 4 appellants. We created a community group to discuss possible solutions and to do all the things that I just mentioned to you. And the sort of, I would say, initiative that was birthed out of all these meetings and all of this work was Mission Verde. And this is a project that we created, an initiative that we created to work with the city of San Francisco as an alternative creative solution to just the removal of trees, the removal and replanting of trees. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that, because I think when we're talking about just sort of what is available to us, it was not available to save all 78 of the trees in our community. In fact, after much fighting and back and forth and negotiating, we were able to arrive at the removal of 33 trees. And that might seem in some ways like a kind of, a victory of sorts, and it is, and it's still 33 trees in your community. So how can you come up with solutions that then maybe, what's the way that you want to say, solutions that can even serve to improve things beyond that? How can you see beyond the removal of the trees? And I really think that Mission Verde is a kind of testament to that. So what happened is that we partnered with Calle 24, who's a local community group in the 24th Street corridor, and also with many concerned citizens in the neighborhood. And we came up with this plan. Let me share it with you. So we figured out that the Bureau of Urban Forestry had already budgeted some money for the removal of trees. They had actually budgeted for the removal of 50 trees. It turns out that to remove and replant one tree in the city of San Francisco is $2,000. $1,500 of those dollars is just for the establishment watering of that one tree. So it's $500 to put the tree in the ground, and then $1,500 to water it for 3 years. So our proposal to the city was, what if we, Mission Verde, take over the watering piece of your plan? Would you then be able to plant 3 times the number of trees? And so, and they agreed. Now, what that meant was that we would, instead of having 50 trees replanted in our neighborhood, we would get really 150 trees. So that was wonderful and a very exciting, possibility. But these new plantings do require a huge amount of water, and as I said, it's for establishment watering of 3 years. So we also had to develop a coalition of waterers. So we were able to tap into all of the volunteers who attended many of the early meetings. We're still looking for more volunteers. And what we did is divide our neighborhood, the most acutely affected part of our neighborhood by these mass removals, into rainbow-colored quadrants, and to organize our watering in this way, so that it could be specific small quadrants that citizens were responsible for, or that volunteer waterers were responsible for, and that we could more easily keep track of specifically where removals were happening and who would be watering what, where, when. On this map, you'll also see all of the fire hydrants that are in the neighborhood that we mapped out. And we determined that our volunteers could use I'm going to go forward here, could use a watering cart, like the one that you see here up in the upper right hand corner, and tap into the fire hydrant system in the city, and so that the local citizens wouldn't be responsible for also paying for the water themselves or responsible themselves, but that we would actually have the city providing us with the water to fill the watering bags, these kind of green bags that you see here that are installed with the new plantings of the trees. And we collaborated with Calle 24 to have Latino Cultural District crossbeams designed to go around the new plantings to protect them, and also to keep in line with the spirit of the community. And here's an example of how we would divide the watering, the watering responsibilities throughout the different quadrants. So when we presented this to the city, they were very enthusiastic about this, and of course we were as well. Not only do we receive 3 times the number of trees in our neighborhood, but also it relieves them of that particular establishment watering responsibility for the first 3 years. So we felt that it was a very good win-win in order to grow our urban canopy in the mission, um, and also arrive at some kind of an agreement with the city. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to say. Maybe I'll stop my share and just say for a second that as I said, I am a very, this is the first time that I ever became involved with something like this. And I think oftentimes if somebody would have said to me, do you want to create a program to water trees in the mission? I would have said, I don't know anything about that. No, I don't. I'm not really, I don't have the credentials to do something like that. And I'd probably really, mess it up. But because this started with the love of one tree and kind of branched out from there, now I'm able to see the places where there are possibilities where oftentimes we cut ourselves off from that. And so I would just say that, speaking to regular citizens, what I've learned through this process is that a lot of times the people who are in charge of these things actually need community guidance. They actually need the guidance of the citizens. You have so much more at your disposal from yourself and from your community than you would guess. And that's been apparent every step of the way. We were not able to save every tree on 24th Street. We were not even able to save the tree in front of my apartment on 24th Street. But what started out as a kind of a self-serving kind of selfish pursuit turned into something that was bigger than the tree outside of my building, and involved many more people, and I think ultimately will have a much bigger impact for good in our community than I could have envisioned. But it's taking the first step into something that's unknown, something that you care about, and I think it can have extraordinary results, even in an area where perhaps you never dreamed you could have a sphere of influence. Your sphere of influence is, you have a sphere of influence that you may not even realize that you have. So I just encourage everybody to get involved in something you care about, because you really can make a difference in that.
That is really lovely to hear, Kindra. And unfortunately, I have to dispute a couple of things you said. One thing is, you're certainly not ordinary. This is an extraordinary work. And I wouldn't say that responding to caring for the tree that you love is so much selfish as it is just being so responsive. So I just want to thank you for being present for that tree and for your neighborhood in the way that you have been. It's amazing. And I speaking as a person who's been an appellant in the tree removal process, I have to say that actually there's some common ground with opera. I think dealing with city processes are somewhat operatic. It's very,
That's for sure.
yeah, it's certainly a cast of thousands, like there's all sorts of people involved that you never would expect. And I think I just like to point out too that the sensitivity that you bring to because of your training in music, is probably something that really helped you with the cultural competence required to execute this project to this level, and also just being able to be aware of so many different systems and not become overwhelmed. So overwhelmed that you can't keep going. So, because I know it's overwhelming at any given time. I also love the way that you recall your first kind of contact with the work. And I was wondering if, Sara, could you tell us just a second about what you remember about how you became excited about doing this, like that moment when you realized, oh, trees are part of my work?
Sure. For me, it is kind of about understanding complicated or complex systems and hearing about one silo of people who are focused on Market Street and saying, well, we can't do this because of this, this, and this, and this. And then hearing this other silo of folks saying, we wish we could do this, but we're limited by this, this, and this. And it's like, oh, if you two just talk to each other, you'd find that you're actually on the same page and can help each other out. That said, that is really hard for a lot of folks to do because in our day-to-day jobs, we're often so focused on what's right in front of our faces that it takes a conscious effort and intention to be able to take a step back and think about that. And like, within a city that we're all on the same page as a city organization, what shared resources do we have? What can we almost like barter or trade off to be able to help each other out to kind of see this unified vision of planting more trees in San Francisco because we all understand the benefits of it. So.
Well, it's beautiful to see the way how the both of you are navigating complexity to in public service. And even though those are not your day jobs, so to speak, you're redefining for us another way to practice public service. Which brings me to Josh. So Josh, I've been knowing you for a while through this work, and I see that you practice public service in a really unique way. And I'm wondering, sorry for my cat, I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about how you came to this and what you're thinking these days and how you're navigating complexity around all of this.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just pin myself. There we go. So I first of all just want to let everyone know that Sara is actually my wife, and I am just sitting here just like beaming and so happy and so just like, wow, I managed to finagle this brilliant woman to agree to marry me. And but I'm just so, every time she talks about this, her problem solving approach and these designs, I just am so moved by how smart she is and thoughtful, and in all of the work, she gives you a very high view, but like there was really so much work that went into really understanding the problem. And I think that is something, for everyone who's listening, I really think the first part of being part of the solution is really understanding the problem. And so for Sara, understanding like, oh, okay, the city needs a nursery. We've got these infrastructural conflicts. We're losing all these trees. We need more trees. How can we sort of solve all of these things with the existing tools that we have and in budget, and maybe even improve the situation even more, creating perhaps a revenue stream, really doing, a full cycle approach to this. And Kindra, yeah, I kind of dragged her into this. Kindra is great. I met her through the 24th Street removal process, and I think it's really awesome that she showed all of those, all the meetings that we have, all the steps along the way, because sometimes, if something doesn't happen the first time we ask for it, people can get discouraged. And I think it's really important to understand that there is value even in that lengthy process. There is value in, all of the people that it brought in, really understanding the complexities of the problem. For instance, when Kindra shows that we were out there, measuring the trees, That wasn't something the city offered to do. That's something we kind of made them do, was to evaluate what was the actual environmental impact of what was being proposed. That was something the city had never done before in a tree removal. This was a first of its kind. And also to understand, to have come up with that solution, it really took understanding the budget, understanding that it takes $2,000 to plant a tree, right? And what that money goes to in order to propose a solution. And I would add to that, so Kindra said it takes $2,000 to remove and plant. It actually only takes $2,000 to plant. To remove a tree takes around $7,000. And what we explained to the city is, well, city, if it takes $7,000 to remove a tree, but it takes $3,000 to prune it responsibly, in the era of COVID, when we're all struggling with our budgets, maybe we should really prioritize pruning over removal, because it will actually save you money. But you need to understand, as a citizen, we have to educate ourselves so that we can bring feasible solutions to the table. And what I'll say also about feasible solutions is, anyone who has done advocacy work inside of city governments understands the first answer, the second answer, probably the 10th answer you're going to get is no, why it can't be done. And you just got to keep asking. You've got to believe. I think if we all have our eyes, the vision here is a sustainable city, a sustainable world. If we keep our eyes on that, you got to keep asking. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. I do want to just give a brief, very brief, I just threw some slides together here. I will show you. So here again are just sort of some of the issues that come up in these complicated urban environments. So conflicting utilities. In San Francisco, for instance, we have a program called Vision Zero. And so this is to try to reduce obstructions in public rights of way, to reduce accidents and injuries. And so where this comes up is taking out trees that may conflict with street lights or street signs or crosswalks. We also have a lot of underground infrastructure dealing with sewers. So in San Francisco, for instance, we have our combined sewer system and other underground utilities. And then we've also got, in San Francisco, and I think probably in a lot of other cities, a disaggregation of canopy management. So for instance, here we've got public works that manages our street trees. We've got rec park that manages our park trees, and never the twain shall meet. And what I think is really neat about Sara's proposal is it starts to integrate departments, and it starts to create a system of integrated management, because you're forced to talk to one another. So instead of rec park doing their thing over here and public works doing their thing over here, we're talking to each other and possibly even conserving city resources by that integration. I have here a bullet point on the disconnect between, sorry, I'm having to move my people around because it's over my screen. Okay, disconnect between plans and needs. So for instance, in San Francisco, we've got a Department of the Environment that put together this fantastic climate action strategy around preserving and planting and growing urban canopy. But when new plans for developments come before our planning commission, there is zero consideration of tree preservation. So there's a real disconnect there between our planning department and our Department of the Environment. Cities act a lot out of liability, a defensive posture. So that came up a lot in the 24th Street matter. They don't want trees, branches falling, things like that. And so trying to encourage, obviously this is very important. And it should not be the decisive, always driving factor in how we are managing our canopy. And then private development, that in my bullet point here, that kind of goes back to how we approach development projects in cities, and then funding, which Sara actually talked a little bit about, which I had forgotten that was in your presentation, and I'm glad you brought that back up. So I'm just going to show you a couple little things that I have shared with other city officials. So for instance, looking here at this photo on the left, where we've got buildings that are actually designed around trees, or maybe that tree wasn't there when that building was built, but they grew it there. This is, instead of cutting everything down, actually really working with our environments. Come on, slide. There we go. I found this photo and I'm in love with it. This is a kindergarten that was where they built this play structure around this tree. And what's really wonderful about this is not only have they managed to preserve this tree, but they've actually made it a feature of this kindergarten. where now these kids not only get to play on these multiple levels and have this fun running around, but whether they realize it or not, they are falling in love with nature. They are being part of nature. I just can't get enough of this photo. I think I should probably just paint it on my wall. Sorry, Sarah, I won't, don't worry. And then this is, this comes from the city of Danville in California. There was this giant, beautiful, majestic oak tree that was being proposed for a removal. I presume because there was some fear of limbs falling. Again, this is, a lot of cities sort of are driven from a liability perspective. And what they did instead was they created this structure that not only preserves the tree, but it also preserves it reduces injury, because if something falls, it's going to fall in a way that's going to be away from the public rights of way. And this is a pretty large structure, but I think about here in San Francisco, one of the conflicting infrastructure arguments that comes up a lot is bus stops. And there's a rule in San Francisco that you can't have a tree within 8 feet of a bus stop. Now, from a liability perspective, that makes perfect sense. But from a human perspective, as Kasey talks about, it makes no sense. Because where do people on sidewalks like to hang out? They like to hang out under the shade of trees. And the same is true when you're sitting at a bus stop, you would like to be under a tree. So what if instead of, cutting down trees because they're now too close to bus stops, which is sort of funny because usually the trees were there long before the bus stop. But instead, what if you made the tree the feature of the bus stop and just did it in a way that addressed the liability issue that the current 8-foot rule purports to address? So instead of making it further away, bring it in closer, just do it in a way that addresses your concerns. So for instance, if we created bus shelters that had a trunk going right through the middle of it, you could sit there while you're waiting for your bus in the shade of a tree, looking at this trunk of a tree instead of maybe looking out at the traffic. I mean, really imagine that world. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. I could talk about trees forever and ever, as all of the three other people on this panel, and I'm sure all of you attendees know, but I never wanted this series to be about me. I want it to be about this brilliance. We don't have much longer. I'm gonna shut up now. Kasey, take it away.
Well, okay. So Josh, what I didn't say before you began to speak is that you come to this work with a background as an attorney, and particularly specializing in conflict resolution. And it really shows. And I think that we need your help and your work so much. Josh has works very hard on building this webinar, and I think I'd like our audience today to encourage Josh to keep this work up. So anybody who would like to see this continue, please indicate with a show of hands that we should keep going and that we have more to learn. And I'm all in, Josh, as you know. One of the things that we're seeing is that we can take these things on. And if you are joining us as a listener or as a viewer today, as a reader, I would like to encourage you to think about where you are today and what are the things that are right at your hand, the things that you have right at your hand. And as Kindra showed us, one of our big resources is the things that we love. So what is it that you love in our trees? Where is your tree that you love, or your stand of trees that you love? Find a way to take care of those trees, even if it's just in your imagination for right now. The work starts from where we are. It always does. And no bit of work is too small, because as Mother Teresa reminded us, the great works of this world are not large things, but small things done with great love. So I want to encourage anyone who's feeling that little inkling of something needs to be done to think about how it could be something I can do something. What is that something? And oftentimes it may appear to you to be a very small thing, but just go ahead and follow that thread. That's how we all got started, is following a thread. And the other thing is, as Josh said, don't give up. So it's very easy when you're interacting with city processes to just be overwhelmed by it and feel like, oh, how can this succeed? But another way to keep from giving up is to join with our neighbors and find people who are working in the same way and work together to do this work. You can, become overwhelmed at the weight of things, or you can take inspiration from the weight of things and encourage yourself by just going outside, getting a breath of fresh air. If you can't go out because of smoke or mobility issues, you can go outside in your imagination. Athletes in training regularly use this technique. Imagining the activation of muscles actually conditions them to respond. So the big deal is to be present for the work that you're seeing. You can plant something, a fruit tree, a tiny seed, and live with it and see what happens, and don't give up on it. You can join with others to build out your own neural and social network, like our forests, and work with this idea of stewardship for our urban canopy. Encourage each other, honor diversity in your work, and see where it leads. Now, Josh, you have also some more concrete suggestions about what people can do. I would like to say that we want to take these up in more depth in our future series, right? That we're going to do, but so you're not getting off the hook.
Yeah,
you started something.
I know. It's awesome, and it's really interesting, sort of producing your entire webinar series. What I think it shows is that with enough motivation, one can do anything. And to me, this webinar series started on September 9th, which was the day that the skies in California turned orange. And I could not believe that this was happening, and I knew that I had to do more. And there are so many people who have the ability to do, if you just did one little thing, if everyone did one little thing, if you planted a tree in your backyard, if you convinced somebody who has a backyard to plant a tree in theirs. I know we've had some people coming on from the environmental group over at St. Ignatius here in San Francisco, and they are looking at creating a basically crowdsourcing nursery, having churches all over San Francisco start to grow trees that then they can put out into the world. These are things that we can all do. Show up at tree removal hearings here in San Francisco and speak up. Kindra filing an appeal, nothing she ever thought she would ever do in her life, but she did, and it is making a difference. And, we've had people coming on from groups I've met overseas, specifically a group from Sheffield over in the UK, where they had a massive tree removal campaign happening there that they fought, and they fought it for 6 years. And now I am pleased to say this past week, they got an apology from their council for what they did to their trees. It took so much organization, but wow, what an inspirational group. Just goes to show that, we may feel in so many ways in our life, in our world, in this current political environment, we may feel so powerless, but we're not. We've got each other, we've got ourselves, we've got our ideas, our brilliant minds, the perspectives that we bring to this. So, just do something. And it doesn't have to be something huge. It's probably going to start as something that feels really small and really insignificant. But if you've ever seen the seed for a giant sequoia tree, it's about this big. think of that. I've got a bunch in my refrigerator right now. Bless my wife's heart. And, you know, yes, Kindra?
When I say if you want to do something small that has a huge impact, volunteer to water for Mission Verde. And you have my information somewhere. Josh has it. And that's something that makes a big impact if you're in the Mission anywhere along 24th Street. Tell your friends. If you have friends that live in the Mission, you can be one tree responsible for watering one tree, and you will see it grow. And that's an extraordinary experience. No, sorry, Josh. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's exactly it.
Plug
That's
it.
exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. But just remember this, the largest tree on earth starts like this. And I also want to remind you that the oldest living being on earth is the bristlecone pine tree. And bristlecone pines they can grow to 4,000 to 5,000 years old or more. We don't know how much further they can go because of their resilience. And that is what it's going to take for all of us to turn this around. I see.
So Josh, we thank you so much for allowing us to explore some of the ways that forests foster resilience by design in us, in our work, in emulating forests and working to integrate them in our city life. I firmly believe, and I'm reaffirmed in that belief today by this talk, that we can become more resilient too. And I thank you, and I thank all of our panelists. I look forward to working with each of you. I'm going to come and water in the Mission, and you know, Sara, I'm on your team. So thank you.
If anyone has any questions, I put a whole bunch of links in the chat. We can keep that open for a couple minutes if you want to look at that. Where is the chat? I put a whole bunch of stuff in there. I'm putting my personal email in there. You are welcome to it. I can't promise how long it'll take me to get back, but I promise I will. I do.
You're going to record this, right?
This is recorded. I will be putting it on my YouTube channel, which in the follow-up emails that you will all get, you'll have a link to that. And the whole series will be in there. There was one webinar that we had to cancel last week that I am planning on rescheduling. And certainly if I am putting on more webinars, which it sounds like at some point I may be doing, I really actually want to have the Sheffield people come and present to you and talk about what they did. That's what I'm hoping to have as the next webinar. See, I'm already planning it. So there will be more, but you can get engaged also for people who aren't totally turned off by social media, which I understand, but if you're still on it, I do have a Guardians of the Galaxy Trees page on Facebook, which is pretty active actually. So it's a lot of good information there. If you want to find out more, as I said, educating yourself, I put a link to San Francisco's 2014 Urban Forest Plan. So I think that's it. Oh, wow.
Join with your friends.
And Kindra just put her personal phone number in the chat for people that want to volunteer. That is brave, and I am proud of you, Kindra, and I hope.
I'm doing a lot of coordinating, so what is that? More hands make light work or something? So
that's the idea. Well, do let me know how I can help you. I look forward to everyone's success that's contributed to the panel today. Yeah, right.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kasey. Thanks, Josh, Sara, and everybody else.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.